weeks and the last of 2023. This is number 33, Matt.
Wow.
Um, Everyday Inclusion and Belonging Live. We literally talk about everything under the sun as it relates to belonging, inclusion, equity, diversity, workplace culture, change, leadership, anything that is again under the sun when it comes to how do we create workplaces where everybody can come and thrive.
Mm.
Um, I'm Mo. I'm a white woman, mid-length red hair, got some new frames that are slightly cat-eye-ish. I'm wearing a red patterned shirt. My bookcase is behind me. My pronouns are she, her. I am the founder of Moxie and the Everyday Inclusion app and the host of this series, which I just love because one of our core values, one of my personal core values, and one of our core values at Moxie is learning and growth. And selfishly, I get to learn from people like Matt from Predictive Index and author of Expand the Circle, Enlighten Leadership for Our New World of Work. Matt, please introduce yourself because I'm fired up to end this year talking about models of leadership and how we can all continue to expand our circle.
I love it. Yeah. So my name is Dr. Matt Pepsel. I am completely bald. I've got a nice beard that's got some salt and pepper in there. More pepper it is perhaps than it used to be. And wearing a nice green shirt here that's plaid. And I'm in my home office. So I've got a small bookcase behind me and a nice picture of some birch trees that my bride picked out that I find nice this time of year. And I began my career in the U.S. Marine Corps, so I had a military upbringing, and then I shifted into the civilian world to become a project manager and later a product manager, which I did for about 25 years in the Boston area. And along the way, I really took to the human dynamics of organizations. And I was really moved because I saw a lot of people who were doing great work, but also others that were suffering at work. And I wanted to do something about it. So went and got my PhD in psychology, joined the Predictive Index, and have continued my journey through Harvard Business School's executive education programs, and a lot of fun stuff along the way. So a lot of leadership background, a tremendous passion for making sure that we can not only deliver business results, but help people be at their best at work, highest levels of engagement and well-being. And you can't do that without equity, without inclusion, without belonging.
Right. And that really starts with leaders. And I'm curious, right, when you talk about starting out in the Marine Corps and ending up with doctor in front of your name and everything that goes into that, what what led you to the work and what led you in particular to writing this book?
Yeah, I think that the Marine Corps taught me that no matter what level you're at in an organization, you are a leader. You
Mm,
comport yourself, you influence those around you, you have responsibilities, you have an opportunity. And so I feel like that almost gave me an unfair advantage coming into the civilian world. Even as an individual contributor, I was absolutely still conducting myself like a leader.
mm,
The other thing it did is it really taught me that you have to study leadership. They spend a lot of time on leadership development. And I thought all organizations did. Come to find out that wasn't always the case.
mm.
So I feel like that really was my first entree into the importance of leadership in that type of an environment. And I really just enjoyed studying it, practicing it, messing it up, doing a bad job with it for many years before finding my footing and studying it at the highest levels and now writing about it.
Yeah, it was interesting, Matt. I was in conversation with somebody this weekend, another entrepreneur, and we were just talking about how um, the responsibility of leadership, how challenging it is, how rewarding it is, and I probably spend at least 50% of my time thinking, man, I just screwed that up. You know what I mean? Instead of feeling like I've got this down, I've nailed this, right? Like it's
Yeah.
really, really complex. And I really appreciated in the book, Matt, your definition of leadership. And in fact, not just leadership, but enlightened leadership. And so I would love for you to share what is that definition and how did you come to that as a student of leadership?
Yeah, I think historically we've really looked at leaders to drive highest levels of performance. A lot of times when you run a very successful organization in a financial sense or in a results sense, then you're considered a great leader. And that's certainly a part of it. But I think also, in addition to putting up results, we have to make sure we take care of the welfare of our people along the way. And those aren't mutually exclusive, although sometimes we act like they are. So for me, the definition of leadership is, how do I invite others to contribute their collective effort towards some sort of group outcome? And some organizations are extremely large, 100,000 people, employees, and more. And some are much smaller, two, three people working on something important. Those are both leadership opportunities. The enlightened part comes in when I recognize that we have to cast off these outdated attitudes and beliefs we have about leadership. Much of
Mm,
what we train leaders on today is woefully outdated, Mo.
mm,
As you know, it's terrible. And,
mm,
and things that came up in the Industrial Revolution that we're still using today. So for me, what happened was I, like everybody else, went through some things during the pandemic. And I started not showing up for my team the way I wanted. Started not showing up for myself the way I wanted. And I was really thrown for a loop with that. So as I sat down, I said, I've got to reprioritize what's most important to me in my work and in my life. I
mm.
resumed a meditation practice that I had abandoned for probably 15 or so years. And as I was sitting in this Tibetan meditation practice, I came across a framework that really inspired me to think more deeply about leadership. And now I've kind of fast forwarded to a point where I see that leadership really is about achieving the business results, yes, but also caring for and bringing along the welfare of our people along the way. And it
Mm.
requires this others centric form of leadership. Yes, of course you're involved. You're the leader. You're in charge of a given situation. But the more you make it about yourself, because of things like fear or things like pride, the more it actually dilutes not only the other people's welfare and their enjoyment of participating in your objective, but also the business results. So long story short is that it led me to understand that the future of leadership isn't about so much the new things that are going to happen. There's actually ancient timeless principles that we've thought about a lot in terms of mind training and in terms of the human condition that I think really do represent the future of leadership.
So much in there.
Yes,
Uh,
true. Leadership is not to be taken lightly.
it's not. And so I want you to walk us through this framework because there was something that you said in there, and I appreciated that you called this out in the book. Um, because we talk about Maslow's hierarchy of needs quite a bit,
That's right.
right? In terms of and the base of that and psychological safety and but that the idea that it ends there, right? And that Maslow's work, so much before he died was about other focus versus, and
That's
you
right.
said that, right? It can't just be centered on our own path to enlightenment and to better leadership, but what we're creating collectively.
That's right. Yeah, he was the developer of the hierarchy of needs. It's usually represented as a pyramid, if you will, from the most basic physical needs at the bottom. And then his theory was that if you satisfy those needs, you matriculate to the next level of needs. And so it's been called the most cognitively contagious framework in the
Yeah,
world
yeah.
because it's so relatable. I think, if you're
Right.
starving, it's hard to think about anything else. But as you go through your safety needs and relationship needs, you move into esteem needs. And then a lot of people believe his hierarchy stopped at self-actualization. How am I in that flow state? Like Mihai Csikszentmihalyi would have studied and these things. Or how do I fully tap into my unique strengths? But he became, toward the end of his life, very frustrated with how much of an ego drive it was and how me-centric it was. And he continued his research in studying the most successful people on the planet and found that many of them had entered what he called self-transcendence. They were serving something bigger than themselves. They really embraced the sense of purpose and others' focus, but the psychology literature didn't pick that up with the same zeal because this is
Right.
during the 60s and there was a little bit of a spiritual sort of tone or tinge to it. So
Mm.
for a lot of reasons, it just didn't quite get picked up the same way, but it needs to because that's
Yeah.
exactly what's showing up in workplaces today.
Right now, which is why I love this model. So your model starts with leading yourself, and ends with leading the world, right? These expanding circles. Will you walk us through the framework?
Yeah, and I'll talk a little bit about the inspiration for it. So again, in meditation practice, I mentioned as I sat down and was guided through a meditation that says, let's think about ourselves and wish, kindness for ourselves and to be free of suffering. And if you can do that, can you expand that circle of compassion and out just a little bit more to maybe your close family members and friends? And can you go a little further to coworkers and possibly out to strangers and eventually stretch yourself to wish that type of compassionate wish for all sentient beings in the universe, for example. And I sat there and I'm terrible at meditation, Mo. I always think about work, but I had this collision in my brain where I was like, this is exactly how I've approached my leadership journey. I had to learn to lead myself before I could learn to lead others and so on. So I drew inspiration from this ancient Eastern philosophical practice, and I started to look at it through the lens of Western psychology and organizational leadership. And what I came up with was exactly as you said, lead yourself. What does it take to lead yourself? And I started to find study after study showing that if we can increase the self-awareness, if we can increase our self-confidence, if we can bring in authenticity, these are kinds of things we need to bring in to truly lead ourselves. And then we can move out to lead others. Can I lead one other person? Maybe they work for me, maybe they're a peer. Can I lead my boss? The answer is yes. If I do it with empathy, if I do it with an altruistic sense, like these types of things that you find also in the framework, on out to leading your team. So now we have a small group of people. How about leading your organization? Not just the CEO's job, by the way, or the CHRO. It's everyone's job to contribute towards leading at the organizational scale. And then as I kept pressing myself further, can we spill our leadership out into the world? Can we show up for our families and our communities and for society, for the planet, and whatever in a cosmological sense you might believe in, whatever that is, can we use our leadership experiences and capabilities in that regard? That was the full expansion and open the aperture of leadership for me.
So let's start with what I think is the hardest one,
Yeah, I know it's
leading.
coming. Absolutely. Absolutely. Yes.
And
Yes.
I appreciated, it's so funny because when you and I first talked, you said, oh, you've got Tasha's book.
Absolutely.
So Dr. Tasha, you're a shout out Tasha, Insight, and you reference her work in
Oh,
terms of
definitely.
how many of us are actually deluding ourselves,
Yeah, right.
right?
Yeah, yeah. Her research had found, and I found it so delightful
I
that
did too.
95% of us feel that we're self-aware. But when studied empirically with her research team, it was only about 5 to 10%. And so she said,
Exact
it's the
opposite,
exact
right?
opposite. So she had an amazing line in there where she's like, that means 85% of us on a good day are lying to ourselves about whether we're lying to ourselves. And it's so true. It's so
Right.
true. Yeah. Yeah.
Yeah.
So I have to tell you, Mo, I was so thrilled and honored to take and learn from experts like Tasha. There's so many great Amy Edmondson, Simon Sinek, of course, all these types of business authors, psychology studies about people you'll never have heard of, but who've
Right.
contributed meaningful literature to bringing these enlightened practices to, obviously a Western leadership mentality. This stuff is actually been validated scientifically, it works, but it's different. And so a lot of times some organizations are stuck in the past, and we just have to acknowledge that there's going to be that type of resistance.
What have you, so two questions from that. What have you found to be some of your personal best tools or practices for leading self?
Yeah.
That's part one. Part two is totally different. And that is how you overcome that resistance to
Yeah.
thinking about leadership in a different way.
Yeah, the first one about leading yourself, one of the things I think I absolutely do begin with self-awareness and drawing inspiration from some of Tasha's work and work I've done as a coach in the past. I think values are a nice, easy way to get started because most people have a sense of what personal values they may or may not have. So I love a simple values inventory. The book includes exercises for each of the layers and all
Yep.
the different exercises really help you actually put into practice some of the things that we talk about. But I love the idea of starting with a values exercise. There's a lot of different types of assessments. Certainly, the predictive index has a great one. There's a lot of different tools available to just create that type of awareness in both an empirical form And I also like the equivalent of 360 feedback, so feedback, or even just asking people, like there's ways that even amongst a team, we can help one another boost our self-awareness. And then right immediately after I talk about awareness as being important, the very second element of lead yourself is self-acceptance,
Mm,
because you're going to unearth some things that you don't love about yourself. It's
right.
just inevitable if you're truly going to raise your awareness.
Yeah.
And that's where we have to practice self-compassion, self-acceptance, the fabulous work of Kristen Neff and others that are really talking about, give yourself a break, give yourself some grace, and recognize that you can take perceived weaknesses and actually incorporate them into your leadership, because it makes you vulnerable and relatable, and it creates that type of belonging and bonding we talked about at the top of the show. It's very important to be human around other humans.
I think one of the pieces, Matt, that um right, it's imbued throughout your work and was transformative for me back when I growth mindset versus fixed mindset and Carol Dweck's work,
Yep.
because I am willing to take a look at those things that I don't like or that I want to change, or if I see that as an opportunity
Mhm.
to get better, to get stronger, versus something that I need to shy away from. And we are socialized so differently than that.
Oh, yes.
So when you're
Mhm.
talking about resistance to this, right? You like the ability for Brene Brown's work around vulnerability,
That's right.
and being willing to be vulnerable, and then to have this growth approach constantly,
Yeah.
right? That we're always a do it to ourselves project, right? In terms of getting better.
Hugely true. And was it as necessary 10,000 years ago, in the earliest days of human civilization? Perhaps not. What about during the industrial age? Arguably, maybe not. On an assembly line, how much of that do we need? But in today's day and
Yeah.
age,
Yeah.
where people are showing up very human, with very human needs at work, then yes, these types of things aren't nice to have anymore. They're critical for highly performing organizations, teams, and relationships. So yes, I agree with you 100%. And I feel like this is really the turning point that we have hit upon, and which kind of brings us to the resistance question. There's two
Mhm.
things I would say to an executive team. The first is run the numbers. The reality is that we have enough psychological research and organizational studies that show that things like empathy, that show that things like awareness, and so many more things I include in the book, absolutely produce better business results, not just better people results, although it does both. So run the numbers. There's no way you could make a credible argument that something like organizational wellness doesn't actually boost productivity and business benefit. But the second is I would look to your early career professionals, the ones you're working so hard to attract and retain. The reality is they are not having the same needs that you had if you're a Gen X person, if you're a boomer person, or even an early millennial. It's a totally different environment that they were in. So now all of a sudden, what they're expecting from work has changed dramatically. And there's no penalty for them for moving on to the next job to another manager who's going to give them the belonging, who's going to have a more inclusive environment. Like they don't have to put up with your crap.
Mm-mm.
So you better kind of understand, like, you've got to evolve, and you have to encourage your leaders at every level to evolve.
Um, what was the one thing in your research that was most surprising to you?
I think one of the things that jumped out at me was fear, and how much fear showed up over and over again. And I came to the conclusion, I don't say this specifically in the book, fear destroys everything good in organizations and in relationships.
Yeah.
And fear is the ultimate ego drive.
It
It's
is.
always fear for self
Yeah.
versus love for others. And I saw fear undermine everything in organizations. And since then, I almost can't not see it.
Yeah.
It's unbelievable when you start peeling back how fear shows up in organizations. It's devastating because of what it does to people and to those around us, and how much it stubs our and we stub our toes on the way to better business results inadvertently. And a lot of it comes from a fear place.
You know, it's interesting. So going back to the meditation practice, back to right when we're talking about fear and ego, one of the things that I found really helpful is when I like leading self, when I start to is paying attention to when I'm feeling fear
Mhm.
and what is my ego, right, trying to protect me from. And then it's like taking a toddler grocery shopping, where you don't want to take a toddler grocery shopping, right? Because they might, they're going to beg for like all the things, right? But you put them in the cart and you go grocery shopping because you have to get the grocery shopping done. It's a little bit like fear. I'm gonna put you in the cart, but you're not driving.
Right.
And if we can remember that our fear is our ego trying to protect us from something, but it's not doing a good job.
Right. Yeah, that's
Right?
right. Yeah. Yeah.
So we're not going to let the toddler lead the grocery shopping. We can't let our fear lead our leadership.
Yeah, and I think it's such a great analogy because it's not like you can pretend like you're not going to have the toddler or you can leave him in the car. Your goal isn't to eliminate the fear, but it's to recognize that if we can turn down the volume on the fear and turn up the volume on the others and the service of the mission as well as their welfare and kind of meet our basic needs, of course, but not beyond a reasonable degree, then all of a sudden things work a lot better. And
Yeah.
yeah, I think that just exactly summarizes sort of a big surprise for me, which in that type of a framework. And what I came to realize is that fear is about isolation. There's a part of the
Mm,
book where we're going to get very real for a second, but I talk about near-death experiences during the beyond section of Lead the World. And what we find is that the research has shown that people who have these near-death experiences, in almost all the cases, start talk about very similar things across cultures, across demographics, across everything. And they talk about feeling this sense of connection
yeah.
with others, with the universe, et cetera. And in a very small percentage of time, people who have a bad experience, they feel in darkness, they feel isolated. And so I think that it really shows that the more we feed into ego, it's a dead end. Even though we're kind of wired to, we're encouraged to think about me all the time, consume this and all these things. But in reality, true happiness and the contemplatives figured this out many years ago, of course, it lies within kind of others awareness and you can enjoy all of it that much more and have that much more success with it.
Well, and I think it's right. It sort of flies in the face of now there's sort of like the hero CEO, like on the covers of magazines, and it's the antithesis really of good leadership, sort of the stories that we tell in the media about, the unicorn, people that led the unicorn and versus all like every individual in an organization is
Yeah.
leading.
It's true. And I think it is starting to change. I think we've never seen before with Generation Z coming into the workforce such a high interest in sustainability,
Yeah.
in making an impact,
Yeah.
in social causes, and
Oh, in workplaces of belonging, right? They're
huge.
like you said, peace out if I'm not getting it.
Yeah, and in the book, I summarize this as what I call the three killer bees, which is
Yeah.
something we all want: being, belonging, something bigger than myself. Those are the three things. And I call them killer bees because if we don't have those needs met, it kills our productivity, our performance, our intent to stay, everything, bad. So I think whereas before, the generations and during different types of work environments where we didn't have so much choice, those were kind of next level, nice to have things. But they're absolutely requisite now. And they should be, doggone
Yeah,
it. I mean,
absolutely. Right. Yeah.
it's just it's how it can work. It's how it should work.
And I always ask folks in our work, like, do you want your people that you love, do you want them to feel engaged at work or like they're thriving, right? And like they belong? Do you want your people that you love working for an enlightened leader
Right.
or a command and control leader, right? Like it's a very, and then kind of what are you creating? So what what's working, Matt?
Yeah, I think people are starting to pay attention. I think we're starting to recognize in a post-pandemic world, this isn't just a Gen Z thing. I do a lot of research in Gen Z and I talk about what Gen Z wants because I think it's important that demographically speaking, they're making up an increasing percentage of the workforce every day. But every time I share a post or something about it, immediately a Gen X person like myself will say, hey, 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 me too. At the same time, I'm in this post-pandemic, I want those things. So
Absolutely.
I think it's happening. People are advocating for themselves when it comes to mental wellness, when it comes to inclusion and belonging, when it comes to purpose and meaning. And I think that's great that it's coming from that side. I think that slowly but surely employers are beginning to wake up as well. They're starting to realize that we have to make some changes because we can never go back. We can only go forward, right? And it's
Yeah.
going to take something different. Where I think they get stuck a little bit is how do I take managers who are already overwhelmed and overworked and may not have had the training or the experience and now bring them to an enlightened state? And I'm like, okay, well, let's go one step at a time, right? We have to meet people where they are, but that should still be our objective, right?
Right. Eat the elephant one bite at a time.
Definitely. I think if people
Feeling
don't
over,
have basic,
right. Yeah, you could feel overwhelmed by it, or it could be, well, time is going to pass, and we
yeah,
can either be developing, right, and creating and giving leaders the resources, the tools to continue on their journey.
yes, 100%. And I feel like in my work at the Predictive Index, we talk about talent optimization. How do we help everyone achieve the highest possible levels of performance, engagement, and well-being? Josh Bersin talks about human-centric leadership. I think those are great places. And then this enlightened bit is how do we quell the fear and turn down the volume on ego and turn up the volume on everything else? And I do think that work is something we all do. We all have different belief systems, et cetera. But work, we all show up to work. And how do we create workplaces where we make each other healthier and happier and more successful, even beyond the business results, which are non-negotiable? We have to get business results. I get it. But how do we actually fill our cup when it comes to our distinctly human needs and get comfortable with, having these heretofore sort of spiritual domains? Work is melding and integrating, and it's not something we have to be scared about. We have to always be appropriate about it, yes, but we don't have to be scared of it. We have to embrace it and start to figure out how we can go for a collective bigger win.
What do you think the future holds?
I think it's going to be a separation of the haves and have-nots. I think that there's a lot of resistance. There's a lot of older style management that happens. And I think it's going to continue in some organizations. They're a little behind the times. And those are not going to be great places to work. And they're going to lose access to top talent. And eventually they're going to falter and fail. I think that increasingly, though, I talked to somebody the other day and they said, my 14-year-old's in PE class, public school, and they're doing mindful breathing exercises and yoga. And I thought, oh my, this is absolutely changing with Generation Alpha. And they're not that far away from entering the workforce in the grand scheme of things. So I think that, the reality is that we're looking for something in our lives and
Yeah.
things have changed and we're bringing those expectations and those interests to work. So that's where I think that the haves will be like, for example, I heard the other day on a podcast that Ping, the golf club manufacturer, has a spiritual wellness counselor on staff. And you're like, oh, that's happening. And Buddhist monks have been involved at Salesforce.com for some time, teaching people meditation techniques. So I think they're going to see more and more of that. So there's going to be a departure, though, between those two: the group that understands the distinctly human needs and works to accommodate them, and those that don't and pretend like business is this sterile thing and mechanistic, and they're going to lose. That's what's going to happen. That's my prediction.
And I think it's sooner than I think we often talk about that as a future state.
Yeah.
I think we're already starting to see that split.
Yeah,
And
I
in
agree.
fact, Korn Ferry, they just came out with the research, a global shortage of 85 million employees by 2030, right?
Yeah,
That's now.
that's now. And when you look at the most highly skilled people with the skills that we need,
They're
you
already
know,
choosing.
it's non-negotiable that they want belonging and they want the ability to gather. They want coaching and mentorship and opportunities to grow. And if they can't get at your place, they're just going to go get somewhere else.
And I think this is, again, the opportunity to approach this with curiosity and with, instead of feeling overwhelmed and terrified by it, right? And again, fear, right? Putting fear front and center, that it's wow, what a compelling pursuit
Yes.
in
Yes.
leadership. What a compelling pursuit
Yeah. The opportunity
for
is
self, for company,
that's what
right?
excites me the most is the opportunity we have to make a difference, not only in the business results, again, non-negotiable, but in people's lives.
Yeah. Yeah. All right. This has been a great conversation, y'all. This book is phenomenal. And as Matt mentioned, there's a whole section. Of course, I can't put my finger on it. I had a bookmark in it before of different assessments you can go through. There are different tools. So I appreciate that it's also like a working manual.
Yeah, yeah,
Where it's like,
thank you.
here's all the research, here's the framework, and then here's what you can do.
I get you back to work.
Matt, leave me with one last truth bomb, please.
I think one thing we have to remember is we only have so much time, and that's not to say that to be a downer or anything. It's being realistic, and we don't have to be sad about that. But I think that the opportunity we have to make an impact on the people around us, that's going to extend far into the future. I have people who are much younger than me who've been impacted by something I demonstrated or shared, things I didn't even remember or notice or pick up on, but they've incorporated it into their leadership approach, and it shows up in how they lead their people, and that's going to outlive me by many, many generations. That's where the good stuff is. So I think that we can't be lazy and pretend like we've got all the time in the world. The reality is we don't. But the chance to plant seeds today that are going to take hold and carry well into the future and absolutely fundamentally change the world in this universe, it's very real. And I know it can sound a little whatever to some people, but that doesn't take away from the fact that that's the opportunity that we have. And for those that want to embrace it, it's nice to know that there's a way that we can do that.
Oh, Matt, thank you. Thank you for writing this book, for doing the research, for the tools, the resources, for who you are in the world, and the difference that you are making. Y'all, I think it is a great way to wrap up Everyday Inclusion Live this year for us to all spend some time and reflect, and be thinking about what's our goal for ourselves, for our leadership. What can we take into 2024 to continue to expand our circle. So Matt, thank you, thank you, y'all. I will see you in 2024. And if somebody already hasn't done it, we'll drop links to Matt's book, to some of the things that we referenced, because I know we talked about a lot of different tools and resources, and we will see you all in 2024. In the meantime, get out there and do the next right thing. Bye, y'all.